Most notorious street gangs and how poverty-stricken teens in Chicago built a very powerful organization. The book is The Almighty Black P. Stone Nation, The Rise, Fall, and Resurgence of an American Gang. And here now are the co-authors, Natalie Moore and Lance Williams. Thank you for joining us. Natalie, you were watching, a few years ago, you were watching a documentary on BET, American Gangster, about Chicago street gangs, and you started looking for books. You emailed Lance. You found out there weren't any books on Chicago street gangs.
And
so
then,
pick up the story from there.
Right. I mean, I covered the Southside communities for WBEZ, and I thought this would be a good book for me to read just for my own, journalism education. Saw Lance, knew Lance beforehand, and he emails me back and says, there aren't any books. Hey, you want to write a book together? And I thought, that sounds like a good idea. And originally, we thought we would do like an overhaul sweeping book on street organizations, but then we realized that was too much, and he had more connections with the Stones and knew their history, so that's how it boiled down.
You sort of grew up in that environment, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. My dad was a reformed street organization member from out west and got an opportunity to do street work, youth work in the 60s and 70s, and I used to hang out with him. But then as a young professional myself, I found myself following in my father's footsteps and ended up working with a group of young men in West Inglewood and the Auburn Gresham community. Many of them were affiliated with the Black Stone organization.
Yeah, Natalie, Black P. Stone Nation became one of the first and most notorious street gangs. Originally, Black Stone Rangers. They morphed over the decades into the El Rukns. And amazingly, this was a group that flirted with respectability, legitimacy.
Yeah.
How was that?
Well, you have to look at what was happening in the 1960s. You had the Civil Rights Movement, which they were a part of. They marched with King, did some security with him, and then they were introduced to Black Power, Black nationalism. So even though they had their street side, they were also drawn to community work, community service, and throughout the decades, that contradiction really remained, where you had this one community-minded, organized side, and then you had the street side as well.
Yeah, without being an apologist, they actually they did some, I guess, I'm making air quotes here, some legitimate things, didn't they?
Yes, they did.
They even got federal funding, federal grants, millions of dollars.
Well, they were a part of the Woodline Organization jobs training program, where some of the leadership in the organization were actually involved in being educators of young people who had dropped out of school. So yeah, the Woodline Organization was a fiscal agent and got the money on behalf of the Stones to work with them. Right.
The historical underpinnings of Black P. Stone Nation center on two individuals, Eugene Bull Hairston, and in any veteran Chicago journalist certainly knows the name of that gentleman there, Jeff Fort. They were charismatic individuals, weren't they?
They were. Bull Hairston was older, and he had a lot of respect of the older street gangsters, and he was sort of the behind the scenes brains behind the operation. And then you had Jeff Ford, who everybody, no matter how they feel about him, talks about this amazing charisma that he had. So he was like the PR face. So they were co-leaders, and then Bull ended up going to jail for some trumped up charges, and then that allowed Jeff to take over, and then have his imprint on the organization.
Lance, where are they now? Hairston and we know Jeff Fort's serving time in federal prison.
Yeah, Eugene Bull Hairston was killed in the 80s here in Chicago. Jeff is locked up in the federal maximum security penitentiary in Florence, Colorado.
These organizations, especially, I remember covering the El Rukns back in the 80s, they seemed to thrive just almost brazenly. They had their own headquarters, the El Rukn Temple, the police eventually knocked down. What was the source of that brazenness?
Wow, that's a really
they
good...
They operate with impunity. I mean, street gangs in Chicago would never do that.
Well, they did, but there was also law enforcement on them constantly. There were special forces designed to look at them, the war on drugs. You had the ATF. So even though they were doing their thing seemingly brazenly, the media would be camped out in front of the fort to film law enforcement do, raids. So they were always watching. Even when Jeff went to prison, the feds didn't rest. I mean, he has charge upon charge upon charge.
Well, congratulations to you both for telling a very important and up to now untold story, a chapter in the history of Chicago.
Thank
you both.
Thanks.
Natalie Moore, Lance Williams, thank you so much for being with us. They're both signing books Thursday night from 6 to 8 at 57th Street Books. That's at 1301 East 57th. If you want to learn more about the book, check out their website, blackstonebook.com. For a link to that, log on to WGNTV.com/midday.